A man chooses, a slave obeys.
Welcome to the Ethics in Video Games podcast, where we explore issues at the intersection of ethics and video games.
What follows is a series of graphic, interactive scenes that we can't show you.
All right, Andy, so we're talking about morality systems today. So what do you see as a morality system?
Some sort of system that rewarded you for doing right things in the game and maybe punished you for doing, not so right things in a game.
It's interesting that you put it in terms of, rewarding and punishing you specifically, right, for doing good. There are games like, one of the kind of well-known ones was the Buddhist game, right? So the Buddhist ethics game. I think the government of Thailand had commissioned that a while back. I think maybe in the 90s or early 2000s. And that game was supposed to teach you how to be a good person as a good Buddhist, right? Thailand, a very Buddhist country. Mm-hmm. That's not what we're talking about, right?
Oh, okay.
Right. So in that game, and I've never gotten to see the game, and I don't know if there's an English version out there. But in that game, it's one of those things where you need to make the right choices, and you win by being a good person, making the right choices. Right? We're thinking of something else, and I have to admit to you that even though we're calling this morality systems, I heard the term morality systems thrown around a lot without specific explanations. So there probably is one out there. Here's the one that I came up with. Okay? And I don't think it's novel or anything. I think of morality systems as essentially some sort of system that is quantifying morality in a game.
Okay.
Right. So counting your morality in some way. So
sure. Okay. Yep.
So let me give you an example. Right. So 2003. I'm in grad school, right? I'm working on my Ph.D. in ethics, and because I'm an ethics guy, my best friend Vlad calls me up and says, "Hey, man, I just got this game, Knights of the Old Republic, and it has this whole ethical component in it, right?" And I was super interested. I was like, "How do you put ethics into your video game?" There was a part in that game, right, where you had to anytime you wanted to get information, I think. Right, from people, you kind of had choices of either kind of threaten them, or I think maybe even beat them up, or try to be clever and talk it out of them, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was, I think, the most common choice there, and that choice is a sort of ethical choice, right, or sort of moral choice, right? How are you going to get the information? They're leaving it up to you, and you are displaying through your action what your moral character is, right?
Right.
So, if you beat up the guy, you're bad, right? And if you don't do that, if instead you go through peaceful means, you're good.
Well, didn't it instead of just, it wasn't so binary as that, though, was it? It was, if you did it, it would just move you some incremental amount towards, if you beat him up, it would move you incrementally towards the bad end of the spectrum. And Star Wars has the good side, dark side, light side dichotomy spectrum built into the mythos. It's a good versus evil universe. And so, each time you do something bad, it would sort of increment you towards the dark side. And if you did something good, it would increment you back towards the light side.
Right. So it's binary in the sense that, everything is good or bad, right?
Right.
But it's incremental, right? It's not going to judge you as being a good or bad person based on one decision.
Right. It waits till the end of the game and then gives you some sort of score.
That's the case in some other morality systems, but in the one that they had there, it's immediate. Essentially, the more you do, the more you made choices that were bad, the more evil you became, the more you became a Sith, right? The more you were closer to being a Sith Lord, the more your alignment changed, right? And as your alignment changed, your story changed, your powers changed.
Okay.
Right?
Oh, so there were sort of this immediate sort of evolution to your character.
Yes, which was cool, because notice, right? It gave you this ability to decide, how do you want to play, right? Do you want to play as neutral? Do you want to be do you want to be like a pure Jedi? Do you want to be like an evil Sith? and that changed your story somewhat, and that changed your power somewhat. And it was pretty fun to play, to play with that.
Hmm.
Okay, so but notice all of that kind of dependent on this idea of quantifying morality.
Which means it suggests to me that the game designers then had to specify what they thought was good actions and what they thought were bad actions.
Absolutely, right? And they did it in a pretty clear way, right? So, okay, so that's an example of a morality system. It's a pretty simple, straightforward morality system. There's 3 questions I thought we'd try to answer, and I don't know, maybe we want to look at them. What I was thinking we would do is we would ask these 3 questions and then look at 4 different types of morality systems or approaches to morality systems and kind of see how they go along with this.
Okay.
And we'll see if we want to answer them first or kind of just wait. But here are the 3 questions. The
Okay.
first of is, okay, from the developer's perspective, what's the point of a morality system? So, what's the game designer trying to do if the game designer is introducing a morality system, let's say like the one we just talked about?
Hmm. Right. So I have a guess. So of course, every game you design is different. Every game I sit down to design is going to have different goals and different, structures. It'll have a different IP. Star Wars, like we mentioned, has this Jedi versus Sith, light side versus dark side duality built into the universe. So, in some ways, if I were designing a game, I would try to build something. I would try to design something where I gave the player some agency over where they sat on that spectrum. And so that might end up looking like this morality system that they built in the Knights of the Old Republic.
Right, and notice, right, in this case, it's really, really integrated into this particular world, right?
Mhm.
And part of having agency in this world is choosing your path, and part of choosing your path is the moral path. But the moral path is defined by the world, by the game world itself, or that universe itself,
Right.
or the story, or however that goes.
That's right.
Okay, and notice how this might be different, obviously, for different games.
Right.
Okay, so question number 2. What do you think players want from a morality system?
Well, again, I think that depends on the game and the game world. I've been sort of intrigued by this idea that games are in some ways a mirror, that we like to play games that reflect us back in a very not subtle way, but in an overt way, right? We like to play games like, hey, let's play, astrology. Astrology is a game, and the whole point of astrology is to reflect back the player in some way, right? Like, oh, I was born on this date and at this time and in this place on the planet, and this is the rising moon, and I can figure out all these things for the express interest of reflecting myself back to me. And I think that that's kind of that's a kind of joy that people get from some games.
A personal reflection, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The game reflecting me back to myself.
Right, and the game is an occasion for me to think about myself.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Our third question: what are the challenges of designing a morality system? Of course, this is the first in the past. I feel like we've talked about kind of we've had 2 different kinds of episodes, right? We've had episodes about kind of the world and video games, let's say. So our episodes about censorship, let's say, would count as that. We've talked before about kind of how to evaluate the morality of a video game, like maybe our episode talking about what is a bad game, right?
Mhm.
And we've talked before some about the responsibilities of a designer, like when we talked about our episodes about 6 Days in Fallujah. Right, but now we're talking about something different, right? So this is the idea of designing a moral dimension, right?
Right.
And this idea of designing a moral dimension, right? Our lives have a moral dimension. What do you think are the challenges of saying, okay, our lives have a moral dimension. All right, Andy, go ahead and create a moral dimension for our game.
Right. So I will say first off that if you didn't say that to me, if you just said go make a game, it would include it would include a moral dimension anyway.
In
It
what
would just
sense?
it would just be whatever, like if I made I write D&D games all the time for my friends. They include a moral dimension even though I'm not necessarily thinking about moral dimensions when I do it. Right? I'm presenting choices to them and I'm going to and the world is going to react to them based on whether I think that they've made a right choice, a good choice, or a bad choice.
And when you say good and bad here, you mean you present them with some among the choices that you present them. Some of those choices are ethical dilemmas.
Yeah, of course they will be. I can give you an example. You and your party are traveling through the mountains and you come across a goblin village. What do you do?
Well, notice that's a very, very general choice, right?
It's super general, but it has ethical and moral connotations to it, and how they deal with it will have moral and ethical implications to the rest of the game.
Okay, right. Remember we talked about how every designer has puts values into every game, right?
Yeah, of course. And so my values are going to get baked into whatever game I made. Now, that's sort of when you don't ask me to think about it. When you ask me to think about it,
yes,
and think about the moral choices that I'm putting into a game, and then think about the ethical choices, which you are, then I would then start to look outside of myself a little bit. I would say, okay, you're asking me to make a game set in your novels. You're a science fiction writer, and you have a bunch of novels, and I'm making a game based on those. Okay, well, I better read those novels, and I better understand the morality system of your world. So I'm going to try to match the morality system of whatever world that I'm building in. If there are other people, involved in the game design, because it's never just one person.
right.
We're going to discuss these things. We're going to come up to if there's not one that's already built, then we're going to discuss what it means.
Though, notice you use the word morality system, but I think you probably mean something more like the value system. So value rather than morality. So or the ethos, right? So in those kind of
maybe I don't
worlds-
understand the difference.
So okay, so here's the way I see it. And again, this is the kind of thing where people might use different languages. Values are things that are important. So the value system would be the things that, let's say, people in that world find important. Or,
Okay.
Their ethos might be maybe another way of kind of like your value system is how the different values relate, their value priorities, which things in the world matter to you more than others. When I'm thinking about morality system, I'm thinking more than that. I'm thinking of kind of trying to do this in some sort of systematic way that counts something. At least that's the general idea, and I don't know if we're going to stay with that idea.
Right, but before we even figure out before we even figure out how to count things, we have to figure out what to count.
Right. So it's interesting, right?
That's where I would start. I mean, you're asking me as a game designer. That's where I would start. Yeah, of course. And so those would be the things that you would count in order to start building a morality system.
Okay.
Right?
Well, they certainly could be, right? And if you think about reputation systems, in some sense, and we'll talk about reputation systems, right? But reputation systems, in some sense, really work like that, right?
Yeah.
Right. You're thinking about what people want, what people care about, and you're measuring as how much the character is giving people what they value.
Right. When we did Return to Krondor, that's basically what we did. Although we did it character by character.
Right.
We thought about, all right, here's this character you're interacting with. What does this person care about? Have you done anything that makes him feel negatively towards you or positively towards you in the past? Is he going to react? Is he going to say something about something that you've done? You walk into the baker's shop. It's a fantasy world. You walk into the armorer's shop, and you happen to have killed some orcs that were threatening the town. He should probably mention that. He should probably say something about, hey, you did a good thing out there.
Right. He cares about this, right? You have done something that meets with the things that he cares about, that he approves of, and he's showing approval, right? And
Right.
hopefully he's remembering.
Right. Right. And there's only so much you can remember, right? When you're writing games, there's only so much dialogue you can write for any one character.
Sure. Right. So there's only so much
So there's only
specifically
so
you can
many things. So you really have to think about, all right, what are the top 3 things that he's going to care about and mention. Otherwise, he might just, continue on feeling whatever he felt before.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so let's get into our kind of systems, and
Mhm.
I this is sort of a combination of systems I found on different websites. I was looking for some way to kind of organize this conversation. So the first one is the karma scale. At least that's how it's often called. And this is what the Knights of the Old Republic had, right?
Yeah.
Essentially, being moral is measured on a single good or bad spectrum. When you do things, you get good points. When you do bad things, you get bad points, right?
Mhm.
So, and you get essentially this spectrum, and you're somewhere along this spectrum. And it's interesting, right? You would figure this whole morality system, you're counting something at some point that has to impact the game in some way, right? You got to do
Right.
something with it. Otherwise, there's no point in what you're doing.
Right.
So what is the point here?
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, it depends on the game, right? It depends on what you're doing. In Black and White, as you're sort of a god character, and you've got a
Right.
little village of people that you're caring for, and you've also got this avatar creature that, depending on it has basically the same sort of karma system that you're talking about, a good
Right.
versus bad, black versus
Yes.
white kind of thing. Um, as you do actions that are good, your beast, your avatar beast, is like a giant monster, becomes more angelic looking and more spirits of nature kind of good character.
And that
And if you
lets
do
you
bad
know,
things, it becomes more demonic looking.
right? And that lets you know, essentially, the game is remembering, right? Its judgment of you, right? It's kind of
Right.
reflecting back at you. Here's what you did. You acted badly, or you acted well, and all this might be maybe an occasion for you to think about yourself, right? Hopefully, that's
Sure.
part of the
That's
fun.
almost never our design.
Okay, fair enough. So why do you think? Yeah, and I don't think it would work very well with a system like that.
No.
What do you think was the point in Black and White?
I think the biggest impulse is to prove to the player that the game is listening. The
Okay.
game is looking at them and listening to them and reacting, and it's not just, you're not on rails, because a lot of games present, it's like you're just doing the thing that the game asks you to do, and you get to
Right.
the end and yay, you're done. But there is sort of this, especially in role playing games, there's a big sort of aesthetic push to try to make a game that really feels like a human game master,
Right.
and is listening to you and is reacting to the things that you do in a meaningful way. So you could argue, how meaningful is it to just change the appearance of my beast? But at least it's it's meaningfully visually.
Well, I mean, by changing the appearance of the beast, you're judging, right, the morality of my actions. But this idea of judging, I think, is really interesting.
And I don't think players want to be judged so much as they just want to be listened to.
I think it depends on what you mean by judging and what kind of judging, right, we're talking about, right?
Mhm.
I mean, certainly players want to be judged about how good they are, right? I think, at least in certain contexts, not always,
Right.
right?
Sure.
So, okay, so here's what I think are like the pros of this kind of approach, right? Number one, it's simple to program and it's straightforward.
Well, the system itself is not hard to implement. The individual things that go into it can be quite hard to implement.
Like what?
So, like deciding whether or not an action is a good action or a bad action might not be as easy as you make it seem.
For this reason, the easiest way to do this kind of systems, and I think the way they're normally done, is you just make the action really obviously bad or obviously good.
No. I'm not talking about how the action is presented. I'm talking about, like, you kill a goblin. Was that a good thing or a bad thing?
I'm assuming in these kinds of games, that unless the scenario, unless the action has obvious kind of moral importance, it just doesn't count, right? It's not like everything needs to count.
But the more you do, the more valuable it is. So the more things that count, the more valuable it is. The more that, because we're trying to make a game that listens to you.
Right.
So
that seems right, though not every action is a moral action. But you're right. I mean, so this is definitely a challenge, right? It's simple if you stay to
Right.
the simply, and again,
if it's literally like dialogue choices that all we care about is what you say or do in a dialogue choice,
right.
then yeah, that's simple. But that's not going to be particularly meaningful unless that's all the game is, because there's a lot of games that are just that. They're just dialogue choices.
Right. Or you restrict the morality system only to dialogue choices and you're not looking at actions.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. That doesn't feel very meaningful if it's like that.
Well, it depends. I mean, it's still choices that you make, right, through your agency. Though notice, right, you can also focus on some actions but not others. Besides that, I think one nice thing about it that I think we see in Knights of the Old Republic is this ability to adjust the storyline to fit in with your character's morality. And you could do that in other games too, right? You can essentially give you the good or bad guy story, or the mixed story, right?
Right. And again, there's only so much you can do because there's only so much you can write. There's only so much material you can produce. So really, like frequently those games really devolve into 2 endings, maybe 3 endings.
Right.
There's not a whole lot of creative space there, just because you would have to create so much more material.
Right. Though again, right, the 2 or 3 endings themselves, or paths, right, and themselves might be more enjoyable than the one.
Right. And with reputation systems, like in Return to Krondor, we got away with, like, every so often you would move from one town to another town.
Okay.
And then everything gets zeroed out.
Okay.
Right? Because these people don't know you.
Right.
So now you get your reputations get to zeroed out because you no longer care about what those people in the last town think because you're never going back there.
Interesting. Okay. Which is interesting because you would think that after a while you would know that and just manipulate, do what you got to do to get whatever you need from those people since you're not coming back anyway. Or at least that's a possibility. So, okay. So let me talk about the cons here of what I think at least are the cons for the karma scale. Let's see what you think. Number one is I find these choices to be really nothing like real life ethics. In that real life ethics is really nuanced and it's really complicated. And we've talked about issues in this show that, you just can't capture in this kind of obviously good, obviously bad, right? There's often a mix to them. Or people just would disagree on what is good and what is bad. There's also, never mind that we're even just talking about the actions, right? There's still the why you did it, right? Your intention for doing it, right? And your reasons for it. Then you have this the fact that, and I think this really applies especially for a game like Knights of the Old Republic. Usually these things get used strategically instead of realistically, right? So it's not like, here I am and I'm about to potentially, I need to get this information from this person. It's not like it's going to make me feel like I'm in there, I'm within the magic circle. What am I going to do? It's more like, hey, do I want to play as a good guy or as a bad guy? Right? Which one is going to be more fun for me? Or which one did I do last time if I'm going to do a replay? Right? And that's a strategic use.
Yeah, and it comes naturally, I think, from games that have an end.
Right.
So you could talk then. You could go and instead talk about games and like massively multiplayer online games where you go and you do sort of live in that world, and maybe your reputation is meaningful over a long time, and there's no end point. So you're not like it's not like at some point you're making strategic choices to win,
right,
or to finish. You're just in the game,
right? Though you might be making strategic choices of how to play, right? How to kind of what your story.
But you'll have to live with those choices for an indeterminate number of futures, right?
Right. But of course that is sometimes the the choice that you want, right? You're willing to live with your choices, just like in real life. You're like, I want to play life this way.
But that's just like real life, right?
Yes, but it is usually not on the ethical aspect of this real life. Though you're right. When you're talking about, right, these MMOs, you're also talking about interacting with a lot of people, and maybe the kind of choices you're making about how to play the game might also be choices that you're making about how to live life. What you want from the game might relate to what you want from life. And that's a kind of broadly ethical choice, right? Remember we talked about ethics in terms of how to live your life. So it's, there's a relationship, I think, between how do you play the game and how do you live your life.
Right. A game will usually have some sort of set kind of goals for you in regards to how you live your life. Like if you're in a massively multiplayer game, you live your life as some sort of combatant. If you're playing World of Warcraft, you're living your life as a combatant, which means that's the ethics of the game. That's the morality of the game. What makes me a better warrior?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Some games really put that out there for you, and some games let you play by your own values, right? Like you know how addicted I am to Civilization, right? Which I love Civilization. And I'm playing it with my son all the time. And Civilization is one of those games where you can choose your values, right? And there's lots of different ways to win. And you can think of those strategies as simply strategies, or you can think about what it means to win by converting everyone to your religion, or what it means by, culture, to win by culture.
See, do you feel like that game has a morality system?
No. I feel like it doesn't have a morality. It just keeps it open for you to play. So these are really different, I think, than these kind of, it's not counting the morality of your choices. It's just keeping track of the choices that you do make. There's one more thing, by the way, I think that the karma scale is particularly bad at. And, that's something that you mentioned earlier, designers don't try to do often, but sometimes they certainly try to do, which is create ethical reflection in the player. And I am big on this, and in my class, right, we specifically talk about, right, this is an aim of my students' final projects. How do you create a game that creates ethical reflection in the player? And one thing that karma scale systems suck at, I think, is getting you to actually think about why you're doing this. Because why you're doing this is strategic. Right. Okay, so let's move to number 2. So number 2 is one I'm assuming you're very, very familiar with, the alignment chart.
Sure, D&D's old-fashioned alignment chart. I should post. I don't believe it exists anymore in D&D. Like 5th edition D&D has pretty much erased the last vestiges of that because they found it to be too limiting and not very useful. In early editions of D&D, it was baked into the world in much the same way that Star Wars has baked in light side and dark side. Right. There were these 9 alignments, and these 9 alignments actually went to several, associated different gods and different, planes above, beyond Earth, different heavens and hells.
Oh wow! So it was that complicated.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they were very specifically linked to certain kinds of spells that you could and couldn't cast depending on what alignment you were.
Okay. So let's talk about alignment and what that is. So, the way I'm seeing it, right, is that you have your moral scale, right? Good, neutral, bad. And then you have this additional scale, which is the lawful to chaotic.
Right. And then D&D basically put them on a plane and put them at orthogonal angles to one another so that, you could be super good, but also super chaotic. Right. Or super good and also super lawful, the opposite of chaotic. And then, or you could be what they called true neutral, which was neither good, neither bad, neither chaotic, neither lawful.
Right. And it's interesting because, if you're listening and you've never seen one of these alignment charts, go to like Google Images and type alignment charts, and you'll see alignment charts for everything. Right.
Oh, yeah.
So, right. In fact, as I'm watching the Harry Potter series with my son, I keep thinking about the alignment chart for Harry Potter, of which I think there's a few, and I'm trying to place the alignment chart for the characters. Like Snape is neutral, right? He's right,
True neutral.
and
Yep.
right, every character in there has a place in that chart, and it's an interesting way to kind of think about your character's kind of general viewpoint towards the world, right? Is one way to kind of think about it.
Yeah, it's a interesting starting place to start thinking about this stuff.
To me, compared to what I generally see out there in terms of shortcuts for way of thinking about characters, it's still not bad, right? So here's
Right.
one way I kind of read about what you might think about these characters. So and how to describe lawful characters and chaotic and the relationship they might have to morality. So this says lawful characters tell the truth, keep their word, respect authority, honor tradition, and judge all those who fall short of their duties. Of course, their judgment can be really, really bad. By the way, I think right in the Star Wars universe, Darth Vader is supposed to be evil, lawful evil. I think right, right.
Sure.
Right, he goes by that. He goes within the system. Right. Chaotic characters follow their consciences, resent being told what to do, favor new ideas over tradition, and do what they promise if they feel like it, or maybe not. Right.
Right.
So, right, they're not following these things. That's one way to think about it. Does that kind of match the way you think about it, or would you think about it differently? Because I have a kind of different way of thinking about it.
I mean, yeah, I mean that's the way that they ask you to think about it in those old versions of D&D. You know, we got other systems that came around a little bit later, like in the World of Darkness and Vampire the Masquerade. You had a different scale. You had this idea that you had humanity, and that as a vampire, you're playing vampires. Everybody's a vampire, and you're basically playing vampires within vampire society, and
Cool.
And you're trying to maintain the secrecy of vampire society while still drinking blood, and instead of having this sort of idea of good and evil, they had this sort of idea of humanity and the beast. So you were struggling to hold on to the things that were the human sides of you, and you could lose them and become more bestial.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting what values are attached to these two things, right? Though,
Right.
so was this just a single spectrum of human versus beast?
Yes, although what made it personal was that you had different traits that would different characters had different traits that they were holding on to for their humanity, and also different traits that they could sort of fall into if they sort of let themselves go to the bestial side. So it didn't mean the same thing for every character.
Different in the sense that every character would just have different sorts of encounters or decisions they needed to make.
Yeah. Basically, if the things that they held on to for their humanity would not necessarily be the same as somebody else's.
Okay, so here's my kind of pro con for the and I have other ways of thinking about it, but I think the traditional karmic system or alignment chart, right? It's kind of like the characters of the world are kind of richer, I think, with the karma scale. They're not like good, bad, right? The alignment thing, I think, kind of helps, including your own alignment. But to me, the morality is still pretty shallow. You're still on the good, bad, right?
Sure.
But I think there's kind of a way to kind of maybe think a little bit differently about this in terms of kind of like, how do you think about your obligation to the rules? So I think about it kind of this way. Like, Andy, do you think that you have reasons to obey the law simply because it's the law?
Yes, but I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Because I assume that people, I respect previous thought.
Okay.
That is to say, so somebody's thought enough about this to make it a law. I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt.
Okay.
Now, it could be that once I learn more about it, then I'll be like, oh yeah, that's a terrible law. But if I don't know anything about the law, all I know is it's a law.
What
then
about laws
I assume it's probably a good thing.
So would you say that you would then give it some respect? Do you think you would owe it something because it's the law or because it's a good thing? Because let me ask you this. Let's say there's a bad
because
law.
so
Right.
all right. So once I know something is a bad
Right.
law, it no longer gets the respect. But if all I know is that it is the law,
Okay.
and I don't know anything I don't know how it came to be, I don't know,
Right.
haven't considered its implications, I give it the respect that it deserves because it's the law.
Okay, that's kind of interesting because you've got kind of two different things here. I don't know. At the end of the day, I don't know if you give it the respect you think it deserves because it's the law, but you seem to, by default, assume it's good. So the
Sure.
respect comes from the assumption that people probably thought about it, so they put it into law, so there's probably good reasons, so it's probably good. But
Right.
some people think that you should respect the law simply because it's the law.
Well, if somebody is following the law because it's the law, it means that they can't imagine why it exists.
I see.
Right? The law. I mean, just because it's written down somewhere isn't a thing. It by itself that's not valuable.
The way I'm thinking about it is maybe a little bit different, right? So some people think that, look, just by living in society, right, you are living under laws, and by being in society, you're part of, let's say, the social contract, and you owe some deference to the law. You owe it to obey the law, or at least you have some obligation to obey the law, right? Some people think you should obey the law simply because it's the law. Other people think that, look, bad laws don't have any obligation to you at all. You should only obey the law if they're good laws, right?
Sure.
And some people
Sure.
are somewhere in between. They might say, look, I have a reason to obey the law simply because it's the law, but if the law is really bad, right, I might have a stronger reason not to obey the law. So that's kind of somewhere in between. So notice that this is a kind of a...
But what I disagree with is that anybody obeys the law just because it's the law. That they have some underlying reason for obeying the law.
The idea is that you feel like you need to respect what the laws is. You need to respect the order.
Why?
Right?
Why?
Well,
Everybody's going to have a different answer for that. But they're going to have an answer for that. They're not just going to say, but it's the law. And
right.
then you say, well, why?
So there's different people have different reasons for this, right? So or different philosophers have different reasons for this, right? And again, like I said, one of them could be is, look, you live in society. In this society, we have laws, and it's part of the condition for you to benefit from society. You have to respect its laws and follow its laws, right? That would be kind of one way to kind of think about it. Personally,
Sure.
I'm what you would call an anarchist here. In that I don't think that, and I don't mean that I want to have political anarchy. The anarchist here
right.
is the name that you call someone who doesn't think that laws have these kind of moral obligation on you simply because they're laws. Anyway, but there's people, I've met people in all kind of three positions here. Maybe another way to kind of think about the connection between morality and lawful chaotic is, you could be good, but you might have a certain kind of outlook towards your moral responsibilities towards the law or towards the order, right? Or you could be good and you could say, yeah, but the laws don't mean anything. I only care about the good. Screw whatever order there is. And maybe this is another way to kind of think about the alignment, the alignment chart. That would be a different interpretation of it.
I saw a game designer, I'm going to mind block his name, but he designed The Sims. He gave a really fascinating talk about where he would do things with in a triangle. He, instead of putting things on a line between 2 points, he would put 3 points in a triangle, and then like 3 ideas, three random ideas, and then he would Google each of them and just count the number of hits for each of these things. Google would give you a list of like, here's,
right.
And he would basically say, all right, so these are ideas, these are values. He would just use them for values.
Okay.
This value has, 20,000 hits. This value has 15,000 hits. This value has 1,000 hits. And so he would then, figure out where that point is within that space, that triangular space. And it was sort of a different way of measuring things that I thought was really fascinating and really genius-like. Like that would be a way to, like, if I was going to build a morality system, then I would eschew these sort of single lines, like dark versus light. I would make it more spatial. In his case, he made it planar.
So, I mean, it's interesting because it's, if you have the alignment system, in some sense, this is, I think you can think of it as two-dimensional. Right? Or, where it's not one-dimensional, it's two-dimensional. Right?
It's two-dimensional,
because you're adding this whole attitude about order, right?
Right. So you could say, order versus chaos versus wealth versus poverty versus good versus evil. You could put all these things, and they're not connected to one another, right?
They don't have to be. But in this case, that's why I kind of like my reinterpretation of it, because I think they kind of need to be connected to each other more to have more meaning. And I can see like this connection between order and chaos and morality as this kind of, so it's part of the morality system, right? Not just another vector that explains your character, right?
Right.
But I could also see maybe there's something else that could be added to this as a third dimension, right? And then when you're plotting where the character is at, right, you're plotting them along 3 axes. And off the top of my head, I'm not sure what that would be, but I'm sure given enough time, right, I could think of something.
I'm sure you've seen those charts that are basically, they're radial charts that are these. It'll have maybe 6 or 8 or maybe 10 lines that come out from the center, and each one of these lines measures a different thing.
Okay.
And so you measure. It's like, again, these are frequently things done by people who are measuring some aspect of themselves, and as a way of having a game reflect back to them what they're like.
Okay.
And it ends up with you end up with a sort of chart that kind of with some sort of blobby shape around the center point.
Right.
That sort of measures and describes and visualizes, here's what you look like. And then you can compare that to your friends and see what they look like. And, based on these sort of measurements.
Right, and you can do that for anything. And notice, right, we started with the assumption of morality, a good, bad being a part of it, but we can break up that good, bad, right? Instead, we can give you a chart like that that's going to be, let's say, your values. And we might see that, you're really, your chart shows a lot of compassion, but very little courage, right? That might be, right, that the kind of thing that might kind of go in there. And that would be interesting. Obviously, that would be interesting to know.
Yeah, that would be, and you could build role playing game characters based on that too.
Okay, so let's go to the third one. Reputation system. So we talked a little bit about reputation system, but here's the way I'm kind of seeing it. The reputation system could be either you can have a social reputation, so what the world thinks of you. Like, I don't know, your notoriety. Is that how notoriety sometimes is used?
How does the world think?
Well, society, right? Your reputation among society versus versus individuals, right? Okay. So let's say, right, in your community,
so what you're talking about is some unknown individual who represents the average way that people think about you.
Right. So let's say
when you don't know what somebody's going to think about you, this is probably what they're going to think about you.
Sure. Or maybe you have become, people have heard of you, right? And hearing of you,
fame,
right? And you could be famous or infamous, right? In different ways. It's I'm thinking of Red Dead Redemption 2, which has which you can play the bad guy strategically, right? You can be bad strategically to make the game harder for you. But they don't do that, right? I thought that you could potentially have, as you go across the world of Red Dead 2, if there's like signs in different places of you, as you get, better or worse. But typically it's just, word gets around, we've heard of you and what it is that your general reputation is versus what we talked about before, which is what specific characters think about you, right?
Right.
And the idea here is instead of focusing on whether your actions are actually good or bad, or maybe even in terms of thinking of good or bad, right? We ignore that together, and now we're focusing on how do people feel about you. And part of the interesting thing here is, right, different people in the game social world might have totally different values, and what they think of you might be counted really differently depending about what they care about.
Okay.
Right? So this means that in some sense, what they think of you, your reputation doesn't really have anything to do with who you are, but it has to do with what others think of you. Right? Do you see what I mean by the difference there?
Yeah, and it calls to mind the way that we think about identity now in real world, right? We have my identity as I see me,
right?
My identity as I am seen by society,
right?
Right, and then individuals who don't know me are going to be assumed to see me the way society sees me. Right. Individuals who know me may see me more like I see myself.
Though the way you're phrasing it kind of leaves out the additional idea that we think that there really is a you, right? And that potentially, either you or, the people judging you would be wrong. Now, is a good question, right?
Right.
I think that, almost all of us tend to think that there really is, a real Andy, a real Shlomo.
We like to think that the way that we see ourselves as the real you. Is the real me is the way that I see myself.
Right, but we also know we're very biased.
It's probably more likely that the people who know me best are better judges of the real me than I am.
Maybe, depending how well they know you, right? The people they know you best might still not know you very well, right?
True.
Though, when you think about, especially, we both married and have been with our partner for a significant amount of time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does she know me better than I know myself? I don't think so. I mean, I might be wrong about that, right? But sometimes certainly people that know and love you have access to, to your emotions, to understanding of you that you miss out on. Yeah. I don't know if I would say that applies to that applies in general to everything.
Right. Right. So maybe the real me is some amalgamation of my own view of myself and the people who know me the best.
Maybe, right? Or maybe, so look at it in this way, right? In this way, we're thinking, are you a good or bad person, right? And notice the people that are, the people who you have this reputation with, they're all kind of judging you, but they're all kind of judging you by their own standards of good and bad, right? Their own kind of values. And when I say standards of good and bad here, I don't mean by their own morality. I don't think that morality is relative in that way, but certainly according to their own values. The things that they care about and how much you come close to giving them the things that they care about. But, of course, those people might be missing information. They might be biased and self-interested. They might lack empathy. Maybe they're just evil. Maybe they're sociopaths.
Their values may be so different from mine that the things that I care about are not things that they care about at all.
Right.
Right? In which case, they're looking at totally different aspects of me that I am to make their decisions about whether or not we're going to be friends.
Right. So, okay, now given this, here's my list of pros and cons here, and we'll see if they kind of match what we just talked about or not. Pro is we're not using the simple unidimensional version of morality as good as evil and evil anymore. Right? Now we've got this kind of whole world where people see things differently, right? And we are exposed to lots of different perspectives, right? And And this seems to me like it's very flexible for design, right? You can create a lot of different scenarios where you're not stuck in obvious good bad dichotomies, and you can think about what's going on with specific characters and situations, and that can be complicated and in a really good way, right? Where it can make you think. And again, this ethical reflection part, right, is the part that I'm really interested in. Look, just like real life, people will judge you. And we judge each other all the time. I was actually thinking last night about how, given how complex our social bonds are, right, I think we constantly need to judge each other to kind of see what exactly our relationship is. To kind of know where position ourselves against each other. But I think, it is very, very hard not to judge. Not always moral judgment. Sometimes our judgments are aesthetic or practical. But here we're putting ourselves in the position of being judged, and you put in a moral aspect to that, and you've got something that reflects real life. And, a lot of these things could also, like real life, reflect to small everyday things that a lot of times we don't really think about, but some people really care about, right? And they could judge us on that. Okay, so that's what I think is the pro. What do you think about that? I'm just kind of curious.
Well, so yeah, aesthetically, game design wise, we want worlds to feel real. We want the worlds that you're interacting with to feel like real worlds, which means that the more we can do to make individual people feel individual, and that the way that they react to you, the better. It makes the game more complete, makes the world feel more realistic, more inviting, more like a place you want to spend time.
Okay, the cons. So right. Well, the cons is this isn't exactly about morality at all to me in some way, right? So I don't know if I would call this a moral system, right? It connects with people's values, and you got to think about being judged. But maybe you don't need to think about being judged so much, right? Their moral judgments could be wrong for lots of reasons, right? The way you're judged could be wrong. Your social reputation might not really reflect, especially your intentions. A lot of times when you have these reputation systems, people care only about what you did. They don't care about why you did it. And a lot of times I feel like I've been judged unfairly, right? Because they just don't get my reasons.
Because they didn't know why.
Right.
Well, that's, and in law, there's a motive is required.
And it matters for how you're being judged.
Yeah,
by the
it
law,
matters.
Right.
Yeah.
But let me just say that this doesn't mean that reputation systems can't actually incorporate reasons to explain your reasoning. And I think this would be very interesting, and I think is an improvement, or could be an improvement. I don't know if I've ever seen this in games, but to me, right, one of the in my list of ways to create ethical reflection in video games. A lot of them kind of focus on taking the game and creating opportunities where you're kind of forced to explain yourself, or you're forced to kind of justify yourself, where the conversation tries to kind of dig into why did you do that, or to get perspectives.
In
that
a
kind
game?
of question.
You've seen this in a game?
No, or not?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right.
I thought, yeah. Right.
No, but I have a bunch of ideas about how of how to do that. Triggers for getting you to think, or getting you to think about why you have this reputation, or why you've been judged in this kind of way.
You were talking earlier about how hard it is to create something like this, and this is one of those things where it's super complicated. It's very finessey, right? There's lots of subtleties to this, but that doesn't mean we're on the cusp of a golden age of AI.
Right.
And this is exactly the kind of thing that especially AIs that can learn will be very, very good at.
Ah, interesting. Yes. Hopefully they can do some of these things that I want to do. Right. But yeah, I mean, that definitely opens up new possibilities.
You might not like the result.
Well, we'll see. Right? I mean, I'm hoping for maybe not, a single result, maybe many results.
Okay.
Let me just kind of talk about the last one. And the last one is the no morality system, right? So, right, the idea of is kind of like, okay, you give up on the whole thing, right? You say, look, the whole point of trying to systemize things is, kind of misrepresents what morality is. Instead, let's focus on giving the player opportunities to make ethical decisions, right? And make those good ethical decisions, focus on writing good dilemmas.
The important thing is to make them meaningful in the game some way, right? They have to have meaning within the magic circle of the game. Otherwise, they're just meaningless choices.
Right. There's got to be things at stake to them. You have to connect emotionally, right, to what's happening.
But the downside of that, of course, is that the more more meaningful they are within the circle, the more likely they are to be played strategically.
Why do you think that is? Actually, this is one that I don't see, because to me, part of the idea of making these kinds of ethical decisions as part of the story is that they're often crafted in a way where I don't know what the strategically better approach would be. Right. So if you think about, so a moral dilemma, right, is a situation where you've got, let's say, two bad choices. Let's say that's kind of the classic moral dilemma. Two bad choices. You're choosing the lesser evil. Yeah. And you don't necessarily know, at least in many games, what that's going to lead to.
So the problem with that is that when people come to those situations and they don't have a good angle on how to make a decision, they just choose randomly.
I've done that sometimes.
Right.
But
and what it means is that for them, the choice feels meaningless at the time that they're making it, because they don't have a way to make a decision about it. They don't have an in-game strategic reason for making a choice. They won't fall back onto their own moral choices, their own morality. They'll just pick randomly.
I'm sure that you're right, that for some players, this is the experiences that they have. But I can also see, lots of situations where it's really very different, right? I mean, I think Witcher 3 is really good for stuff like this, and they have lots of ethical decisions that are really kind of, big and small. And part of it is that just the character of Geralt is just so good. He is such an understated character that you can almost, shift him one way or another. He's open to interpretation in terms of motives. But right. I think, but you have lots of other games like this. Heavy Rain has some dilemmas. Life is Strange is, I think, a really, really good one. The Telltale games have some good dilemmas. Yep. And there's been a point where I've put the controller down and sat there for 10 minutes thinking about what I should do, and then decided, oh, screw it, I have no idea. I'm just going to choose one randomly. But that was the rare occasion. And notice, even if that's the case, I just spent 10 minutes thinking about what to do, which was itself, I think.
But were you thinking about it? Were you self-reflecting, or were you reflecting on the game?
Well, it's hopefully both. Right. So for me, the ideal is both. Right. I'm thinking about what this character is doing. I'm thinking about what this means for the character to do this. But I also think about what it means for me to play in this way, and what it means for me to make this kind of decision, and hopefully what it says about my values.
To whom?
To myself.
Oh, okay.
And mind you, I'm an ethicist, right? So of course I think about this stuff.
So you're thinking about these things, right?
I remember, there's an episode of Extra Credit where the guy whose name I always forget. Again, Extra Credit, you're awesome. Sorry, James, I forgot what your last name is. But where he talks about this dilemma in, I think, Mass Effect 2, where for one of the alien races, you can either essentially destroy them or take away their free will. And he talks about essentially how he puts the controller down and spends the next half hour deliberating about this before he decides what to do, right? And it's a binary choice, right? It's just an ethical dilemma that you're faced with, and you can say a lot about the value. It's a little bit like the Clockwork Orange dilemma, right? Which is more important, having things come out in a good way or respecting, let's say, the free will, right, of a being, right?
Right.
And I think in many kind of dilemmas like this, you can create the kind of dilemma that really does get people to seriously kind of stop and focus on the what do I do in terms of the ethics of this situation. And I've made choices that I felt guilty about and thought was the wrong choice, and really felt personally guilty about, where I'm embodying my character. I think I just told my character to do something bad, and it's not so much that I worry about the harmful effect my character has had, because it's a game, right? But I still have enough of a role identification with the character that this is me going through this game. This is me going through this story in one way or another. And I feel ashamed that I was put to the test and I chose wrong, right, according to my values.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's interesting because there's only two of us. And, I'm here talking to you realizing, is this just me? Or is this just me and James? Right? And, different players play things differently. And I really don't know what this means for the way, let's say, people play a game like Life is Strange or The Witcher 3.
And certainly this is a very good, these kinds of decisions are really interesting and important for you as a player. You like these things. These are things that you consider to be fun. And so that would be an absolute reason for a game designer to put them into the game.
Right.
Because there's a cohort of players that find these things super fun.
Right, and it's interesting. You say fun, I say interesting, but of course, interesting is part of the fun, right? I mean, that's the kind of the idea, right? But when we talk about drama, right? I mean, I think of drama as either being about suspense or about ethics, right? And to me, these kind of moral decisions, they're the drama, right? Otherwise, it's just danger, or it's just suspense.
Right.
And if you're going to have drama in your game, right, I want that, those are like the tough choices, right? Okay, the con part of this, though, I think, is that I think it's much harder to do this than I think the reputation system in some ways. That, sometimes we can see the same ethical dilemmas over and over and over again. Telltale Games does that a lot. Are you going to let this person die or this person die?
Sometimes they feel a little cheap.
Yeah.
I feel like what you're really talking about is just good writing, right? Because even non-game media, movies and television, can put us in these moments, these dramatic moments where you're like, I don't know what this character is going to do next. I don't know what I would do next.
Because in the game, right, you're playing, right, you have stronger role identification, right? I think that, right, that impact could be stronger. The movie lets you off, right? In no time, the character makes that decision. In the game, it's usually waiting for you, right, to make that choice, and sometimes ask you to defend that choice, right? Or to feel guilty for that choice.
When it's a movie, when it's a really interesting choice like that in a movie or a TV show, you can spend time thinking about, oh, would I have made the same choice as she made or he made?
Right. Right.
Or did they, or even better, did they make the choice that their character should have made based on what we know about their character? Or did they make a choice that seemed out of character for them?
Right. And notice, right, in that last one, you're drawing distance between yourself and right, you're looking at it from the story perspective, right, as opposed to from the human perspective, right. And I think, right, most of us view it from that, what would I have done? But again, I think with movies, so often we're like, what would I have done? But we never have to make the difficult choice. And I love that games get us to make that difficult choice, right? And I look for games, that do this, and there's probably some of us that specifically look, but I think they're good ways to spice up lots of other games. But you're right. At the end of the day, this is you need good writing there to really
Right. Yeah. It's
to
just
really
really good
make
writing.
it work, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Technically they're not all that difficult, but it's the writing that is exactly the most difficult part of making these sorts of choices.
Technically, they're simple, right? I mean, here's a
Yeah.
choice: A or B. What are you going to do, right? Or A, B, or C.
Right.
We're going to give you 3 options, right?
That's
But
right.
crafting that choice can be really difficult. And then even better, I think, is later on when you come back to the choice that was made. And if you get the character to reflect on that choice that was made, again, right, you're holding them accountable for the choice that they made, right? In some
That's
way.
right.
And I don't mean just in the consequences in terms of rewards and punishment of the game, but also kind of to themselves, right? The rewards and punishment just might be what, other characters think of you, let's say.
Right.
Right.
Right. But it could also be a fatal flaw, right? It could be and that's a super dramatic moment, like that moment when we expose a character's dramatic flaw, and you've done the exposing yourself. You've done it to yourself.
Right.
That's incredibly strong.
Yeah, you own it, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Specs Up the Line, where in that game, right, you're in Dubai after it's I think it's Dubai. I think you're in Dubai after it's been swallowed by a sandstorm. There's a point where essentially the story pushes you more or less to use white phosphorus on all these people, but you make the choice. Ultimately, you make the choice, and
Right.
your squad mates, one of them, just never forgets that choice and is constantly there to remind you of the choice that you made, right? And it heightens, right, your responsibility for the choice, right? And again, this is something that a movie just can't do. At the end of that game, you end up being racked with guilt and committing suicide. You shoot yourself, which seems very appropriate for the storyline of the game, I thought.
Okay.
But
Do you also have that choice, or is that
no, that's
not a choice?
That's not a choice. But it felt appropriate. Like it felt like the game drove you to make those decisions, and that version of yourself kind of deserved to be put down, in some way. Okay, there's other ways to think about morality systems, but let's save those for our follow-up episode. So we're going to have a part 2 for this, and in part 2, we're going to talk about this idea of virtue-focused morality systems. So morality systems like Ultima 4 used, where it's not measuring good and bad exactly, but it's a little bit like you talked about earlier. It's measuring the kind of virtues you have. And the goal there is to become a perfect person. And we're going to talk about some real-life ways that maybe philosophers try to systemize morality and how hard those are. And I actually wanted to talk about Mass Effect's personality system as a kind of way to do it. And my own business ethics game, this game that I've made, where you try to score ethics in a sort of activity context.
Right.
So I thought which is also maybe hopeless for a video game. I don't know. We'll talk about it. Right? We'll see if we can bring that into
multiplayer. A massively multiplayer experience can be anything.
That's true. That is very true. The power of video games is, robust.
Exactly.
All right.
Good game.
Good game. Good podcast.
Good podcast.
All right. Play nice.
You can subscribe and listen to all of our episodes wherever you listen to podcasts.